Hello, my name is Sage Thornbrew, Service Planner Scheduler 2 at the Regional Transportation District. This presentation is designed to help you better understand our service development process, whether you are a city employee, an elected official, or a member of the public. We will try to answer any lingering questions you may have about how service changes are accomplished at RTD, and should you have any remaining questions, feel free to reach out to us anytime at service.changes@rtd-denver.com. To start, let's discuss the fundamental characteristics of the geographical area that we cover. The Regional Transportation District covers 2,300 square miles and serves a population of 3.08 million people, encompasses 40 municipalities, 6 counties, and 2 city-county jurisdictions. We provide 141 fixed routes, service 9,800 bus stops, and manage more than 141,000 weekday fixed route scheduled miles, amassing a total of over 43 million annual fixed route service miles. So, what does the Service Development Department at RTD do? All of the work that happens in our department is designed to create, maintain, review, and refine the schedules of the fixed route services provided by RTD. We explore and develop new or improved services, evaluate the performance of all existing routes, and build bus and train schedules from the ground up, all while using essential technology and data analysis tools. We plan for our regularly scheduled service changes, which occur 3 times per year, usually in January, May, and August. During these scheduled service changes, the Service Development Department may add, change, or reduce any of the following: routes, trips, capacity, or service span. How does the Service Development team accomplish all of this? By using programs and technology that are designed to help us research and analyze data that pertains to the services we provide. Our primary tools are the RideCheck Plus, which we use to analyze ridership and on-time performance, Trapeze, through which we build all of our services schedules, and Remix, a program that helps us analyze other data points along our services, such as the number of cars per household, income-specific data, and other information that comes from census data. Apart from the data analysis and research, we are in a constant state of communication and collaboration with other internal RTD departments, customers, local municipalities, elected officials, schools, businesses, and other community groups that all have an important role to play in the service development process. No decision made in the Service Development Department is ever made without careful planning, attention to detail, and extensive data analysis. Some of our information gathering is done proactively, while some is done reactively. For example, we proactively collect service performance data by utilizing our automatic passenger counters, which give us boarding and alighting data specific to times and locations, and by utilizing our automatic vehicle location technology, which provides us with the on-time performance data that is critical to ensuring that people can rely on our service arriving in a timely manner. We also make use of service monitors, who are individuals employed by RTD to ride our services and collect data to confirm the accuracy of our automatic data collection technologies. We also perform market research by undertaking origin and destination studies, as well as onboard surveys that passengers can fill out at their leisure. We are in a constant state of collaboration with local agencies so that we are aware of any and all new developments that will impact the areas we serve. Reactively, there are a number of ways that we adjust our services. Input from local governments about changes in travel patterns or new development projects are just a couple of the important factors we take into account. We frequently solicit input from operators through operator input sessions, reports that come directly from the operators, and through our operator bulletin board, which is a service whereby operators can submit feedback online. Customer input is extremely important to us as a public agency. Our customer service department frequently fields questions and notes feedback received from individuals who call us or write us letters or emails, and our public hearings are by far the most significant form of customer input that we receive. There is never a bad time to submit input as an RTD customer. Know that you can always reach us through our email at service.changes@rtd-denver.com, even if there is not a current service change being undertaken. We don't just make service changes on a whim. Everything that we do in the Service Development Department at RTD is subject to FTA and FRA standards and regulations, as well as RTD board-approved service standards that guide us through the service development process. Cost effectiveness is another guiding principle of service development at RTD. Our annual budget, revenue projections, and collective bargaining agreement with our operators union all determine how we define and evaluate our services. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which we are subject to, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in any program or activity that receives federal funds or other federal financial assistance. We also abide by the Americans with Disabilities Act, which ensures we are providing resources and services that are easily accessible for those with disabilities in the district. On top of these federal regulations and board-approved standards, we must also take into account the effect on the overall network, like how changes will impact transit-dependent markets, the availability of alternative services within any given area, and how demographic changes will impact RTD services. In the Service Development Department, the two primary factors we evaluate when studying a service's performance are the ridership and on-time performance of that service. Strong ridership is critical to keeping a bus or train route in service, as it becomes increasingly expensive, both from a monetary and vehicle operator perspective, to operate a route that has persistently low ridership. On-time performance is also a critical factor, as this performance metric tells us whether a route needs more time in the schedule to remain on time, or if it actually needs less time to complete its trips. Both of these metrics are determined by our board-approved service standards, and ridership standards in particular may differ based upon the type of service provided. For example, ridership standards are different between urban local routes, regional routes, airport service routes, light rail routes, and so on. RTD provides a variety of services, all designed to address different public needs within areas of differing density, travel patterns, infrastructure, and so on. RTD's rail services are designed to address ridership needs within high-density corridors. Our Central Business District local services are local, limited routes that serve the Central Business District. Urban local services are local, limited routes that serve areas with high residential and employment density. Suburban local services are local, limited routes that serve low to medium density suburban areas. RTD's regional services are long-haul routes that serve outlying residential and employment centers, while we also provide flex ride services that are on-demand, curb-to-curb services for suburban areas with poor access. On this slide, you will see how different services stand out when viewed through the lenses of different metrics. For example, you will notice on the share of in-service hours by class chart that Access-a-Ride, which is our paratransit service, Central Business District, Urban Local, and Suburban Local services are how we utilize most of our in-service hours. In the share of boardings by class chart, you'll notice that our rail, Central Business District, and urban local services are our highest ridership services, which makes sense as they're going through the highest density employment and residential corridors. When you look to our subsidy per boarding chart, you'll see that Access-a-Ride and FlexRide services cost the most to operate in relation to how many riders are served. The boarding per service hour chart will show you which services have the highest ridership per service hour provided, namely our rail and free mall ride services, with the free metro ride service coming in third. To truly understand how services at RTD are developed from beginning to end, it's best to take everything we've discussed up to now and apply it to a major service change that has already occurred at RTD, the N-Line service plan. With the implementation of the N-Line, we weren't only tasked with opening a new rail line. We needed to ensure that the bus routes which would be serving the new N-Line rail stations would be effective in terms of connectivity, on-time performance, and ridership. In order to accomplish this, we needed a thorough understanding of the service area. We started by mapping out potential routing and stop locations, which we achieved by altering existing routes within the area, proposing new routes to serve these stations, and eliminating poorly performing routes that would not serve the stations adequately per our service standards. Once we had the routings established, we needed to drive the proposed routings with an actual vehicle so that we could estimate the travel times of the route and begin building the new schedules. With this travel time information, we were able to accurately predict how much the new bus services would cost to operate, both in terms of monetary expenses and how many operators would be required to physically drive the routes. On this slide, you will see a full visualization of all the routes impacted, altered, or implemented with the N-Line bus service plan. As you can see, these routes are primarily suburban local routes and serve a vast area of the district, so it was critically important that our cost estimations and travel times were extremely accurate. It can be difficult to fully appreciate just how long and intensive RTD service change processes are. This timeline is designed to give a visual representation of how far ahead the RTD Service Development Department works to ensure that service changes are accomplished in an efficient manner. As you can see, in the beginning of January, the January service change takes effect, but we're already working on the next 2 service changes and looking years into the future to make sure we don't miss any projects or developments that will impact the areas we serve. Even before the January service change goes into effect, our department is already discussing service changes for May. In early February, the RTD Board of Directors will review the service change proposals we have put together in collaboration with members of the public, members of city staffs, and elected officials. Later in February, our proposed service changes will be put together in a brochure and distributed to the public. Early in March, RTD Service Planning and Communications staff will begin the public hearing process, where we will take into account feedback we receive from the public who has been made aware of the changes we intend to make for May. Once public comments have been taken into account and any final tweaks to the proposed schedule are made, the RTD board will vote on the May service changes in mid-March, after which, assuming the changes are approved, the scheduling process begins. In the middle of April, we begin the run-cutting process, which is a process by which we take all of the schedules we have created in our Trapeze scheduling software and break them apart into drivable pieces of work for the operators to vote on. The last few steps in the service change process are up next. We will create our public timetables for both print versions and the RTD website, submit the Trailblazer, which is a resource that gives turn-by-turn instructions and tons of vital information to operators, to print. We will create shelter boards that are installed in bus stop shelters throughout the district. The operators will vote on which shifts they want to work for this service change period, and we update all digital information. Thereafter, in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement with RTD operators, the service change will go into effect on the predetermined date. In order to implement a service change, we must take into account public feedback. Once all feedback has been received and the RTD board has approved the changes, the schedules are sent off to the drivers' union for them to vote on their desired shifts. Once the vote has been completed, we upload the data for all route changes onto all RTD vehicles 4 weeks prior to the start of the service change. 2 weeks prior to the start of the service change, we will post the confirmed service changes to the RTD website and provide print materials on board RTD vehicles and at RTD facilities that inform customers of the service changes. 1 week prior to the service change implementation, RTD staff will install shelter boards at all shelters within the district that include the new trip times for affected routes. Now that you've got the big picture, we're going to break down a few elements into finer details that provide a more thorough understanding of the concepts and processes that we perform in the Service Development Department. Let's start with routes. Routes are the lines on the map that RTD buses and trains serve. Routes consist of stops, which are the locations at which passengers can board or alight our services. Between these stops, we have running times. Running times determine how long it takes for a vehicle to travel between 2 points, which is subject to change throughout the day. Once you have a fully built route complete with stops and running times, you can then build trips. A trip is considered to be one full operation of a route from its starting terminal to its ending terminal. Thus, it takes 2 trips to complete the full cycle of a route. One trip from Terminal A to Terminal B, and another trip from Terminal B returning to Terminal A. Once all of the trips have been created for a given route, we move on to the blocking process. Blocks are a sequence of trips linked together, which are eventually able to be cut into shifts for RTD operators through the run cutting process. This slide highlights how running times work and how they are subject to change throughout the day due to changing traffic patterns. For example, the 5:28 a.m. trip that leaves Civic Center Station only requires 6 minutes to get to its next time point, Curtis and 16th Street. The 9:32 a.m. trip, however, needs 7 minutes to get between these 2 points. Here, we'll discuss the process of trip building. Trip building is, essentially, adding up the running time between each time point on the route to determine how long it takes to drive the entire trip from the starting terminal to the ending terminal. The total running time of each trip is also what helps us determine the layover recovery time for the operator, which is the time used by the operator to rehydrate, grab a snack, use the restroom, or stretch our legs. Typically, we are required to provide a layover recovery time of 10% of the total run time of the trip, or 10 minutes, whichever is greater. For example, the 3:22 a.m. trip you see here that leaves Auraria West Station and eventually terminates at Jeffco Government Center Golden Station takes 40 minutes to operate, as it ends at 4:02 a.m. Thus, 10% of 40 minutes means a minimum of 4 minutes of layover recovery time, but we also have to take into account how long it takes for an operator to walk to the restroom at any given station, which changes depending upon the station where they are taking their layover recovery. The full cycle time of the route includes the running time of the trip in both directions, plus the layover recovery times after each trip. With this slide, we'll begin to accumulate a better understanding of the blocking process. The 3:22 a.m. trip from Auraria West Station ends at 4:02 a.m. at Jeffco Government Center Golden Station, meaning that the next trip it can be connected to must begin after 4:02 a.m. However, you must also remember to take layover recovery time into account, which, as we discussed before, is a minimum of 4 minutes due to the 40-minute running time of this trip. The best returning trip that the 3:22 a.m. trip could be connected to starts at 4:13 a.m., leaving the Jeffco Government Center Golden Station and then arriving at Union Station at 4:52 a.m., which permits 11 minutes of layover recovery time for the operator. The next trip which this trip can best connect to is the 5:01 a.m. trip leaving Union Station, which connects to the 5:58 a.m. trip leaving Jeffco Government Center Golden Station, and so on. Here, you'll see the process of putting together multiple blocks. In red, we have the block we were building on the previous slide by connecting a series of trips that join together consecutively. In blue, you'll notice that we've begun building our next block to cover more of the trips provided by this route. And on this slide, you'll notice how all of the blocking covers all of the trips scheduled for this route. Once every trip has been assigned to a block, the route is able to move along into the run cutting process. Interlining is a great way to maximize operational efficiency by making the most of the finite operator, bus, and train resources we have available to us. Interlining combines two or more routes that arrive and depart from a common terminal. As you can see in the graphic, the blue and orange routes both share a common terminal despite serving different areas of the community. If it allows us to reduce the number of operators required to operate these two routes, or if it reduces any inefficiencies, we will attempt to interline these orange and blue routes to minimize the number of buses, trains, and operators we are providing the service with. This allows us to use those saved resources in other areas of the community. This graphic shows how, once the interline vehicle has driven its first trip on one route, the signage on the bus will change at the common terminal to indicate to customers that it is now driving a different route. Here, you will see how interlining can help RTD save on critical resources. Before interlining was implemented on these two example routes, it took 4 buses to operate both routes. After interlining, the routes only required 3 buses for operation, allowing for that extra operator and vehicle to be utilized elsewhere. Why does this matter? How important is it really for RTD to save on a single operator? As you can see, operating vehicles and paying drivers is expensive. That's why it's important for us to make sure we are using our resources in an efficient, equitable, and effective manner. Operating one all-day bus for an entire year costs RTD $337,500 per year, while one all-day train costs RTD $872,000 per year. 4 all-day buses result in a cost of $1,350,000 per year, and 4 all-day trains cost $3,488,000 per year. As you can see, the cost of these resources add up very quickly, which is why it is important for us to utilize strategies like interlining so that we're being responsible with our limited resources. Run cutting is accomplished through a program called Blockbuster. Blockbuster takes the blocks that we've already built and combines them to create shifts for RTD operators. Our department sets up Blockbuster with things called parameters, which inform the run cutting algorithm how it can combine pieces of work into shifts. For example, we don't let the program create shifts in excess of 13 hours, and we set minimum times for how long a shift can be, because it can't be less than a certain amount of time according to our collective bargaining agreement with the drivers' union. While sharing some similar characteristics, Scheduling bus service comes with a series of challenges that scheduling rail service does not, and vice versa. Let's start with bus service. Due to the fact that the vehicles are not tied to a track system, you can be more flexible with route scheduling. Planning route paths is more flexible, while minor changes like frequency and running times can be adjusted to suit the route and resources. You are able to more easily interline routes, and run cutting is often more advantageous for buses. Scheduling bus service does come with some disadvantages, though. Run times are subject to change throughout the day because of traffic patterns. Buses are more affected by changes in weather. There are more stops and time points to maintain, and balancing capacity to demand is more challenging. When we think of the advantages of scheduling rail service, there are a few things that immediately jump to mind. Running times are more consistent due to the fact that the vehicles operate on tracks. It is easier to change capacity, and rail is less affected by traffic, construction, weather, etc. It does have its drawbacks too. The track system does leave the route constrained to a set path. It is more difficult to change frequency. It is harder to expand and vary routes, and you are limited in your options for run cutting and interlining. Now that you've come up with some solutions, let's discuss the merits of each solution. While the equally distributed buses solution is equal in terms of how many buses are operating on each route, it does not necessarily result in providing the best service possible for customers. 12 and 6-minute frequencies are not easy frequencies to make meets with other routes at stations, and a regional route, like Route A, with only 1,000 riders per day, probably does not need 12-minute frequency. The equal frequency solution runs into the same problem. While it creates a solution in which both routes run at an equal frequency, given that Route A has 1,000 riders per day and is a commuter route, while Route B has 3,000 riders per day with consistent ridership all day long, Route A is using too many resources that could be better balanced between the two routes. Which brings us to the at least 15-minute frequency solution. This is the ideal solution for these two routes. 15-minute frequency all day long for Route A, which is a commuter route, is more than sufficient to serve its 1,000 riders per day, who will primarily be riding during the AM and PM peak travel periods. This allows for 5-minute frequency all day long on Route B, whose 3,000 riders per day will benefit greatly from higher frequency service on a local route with consistent ridership all day long. Thank you for taking the time to review our Service Planning 101 presentation. We hope that the information contained within this document has helped you better understand everything we do in the Service Development Department at RTD, and that you can use these concepts and strategies to not only understand how we design service, but to create better working partnerships with RTD through a greater shared understanding of the challenges we face and the strategies we implement to combat them. Should you have any remaining questions, please feel free to reach out to the Service Development Department anytime by contacting service.changes@rtd-denver.com.